So we've all been seeing the news about Russia invading Ukraine recently, and it's absolutely terrible what's going on. I personally have found myself glued to YouTube and podcasts listening about the conflict, the background of the conflict, and just feeling honestly pretty anxious and paralyzed about that. And I think news can be really valuable, and paying attention to the news can be really valuable. But how much news is too much news? How do you know when it's bordering that line of staying informed to becoming obsessed and unhealthy? And today I'm going to dive into that. What's up, everyone? Victoria Dorsano here, and today I'm going to give you 3 indicators that your news consumption has started to teeter into some unhealthy territory, and 3 ways to bring it back into a healthy relationship with the news where you can stay informed but not drive yourself into anxious doom scrolling. But before I dive into that, as always, if you can give this video a like and subscribe to my channel, I would greatly appreciate it. So if you're anything like me, these past few weeks, you have probably been glued to either YouTube or your TV or podcasts or some form of news just because of what has been going on with this Russia-Ukraine conflict. And honestly, if it's not that conflict, there's always something in the news that's being, pushed and kind of in a scary way, and that's just kind of what the news does. But this has been something that personally has really drawn me in, and I have noticed myself really getting absorbed into the news, which says a lot. I don't even have a TV. I normally don't stay that involved in the news, but I found that this particular topic is obviously of utmost importance on a global sphere and impacts not only the people and civilization of Ukraine, but the world at large. Really, it's just something that's a terrible crisis, and it's really got me sucked in. And like I said, guys, to be honest, I don't stay up to date with the news on a daily basis, but in these recent weeks, I've just been so sucked into this conflict and have even been reading a bunch of articles on top of watching YouTube, on top of the podcasts I've been listening to. And it's just something that I've just gotten completely sucked into. And I've noticed a few things have shifted in me in these past few weeks of being pulled into the news about Russia and Ukraine. Number 1, my anxiety went up. Number 2, my sleep quality and sleep efficiency went down. And number 3, my day-to-day productivity tanked. And honestly, it's completely normal to feel some anxiety, fear, and sadness when hearing about something like the Russian invasion of Ukraine and just what's going on there. It truly is a humanitarian crisis on so many levels and just really sad. So I understand that these feelings are normal. But what is not normal is how much this has impacted me on a day-to-day basis in terms of my mental health, emotional health, and well-being overall. And what I realized is that I was sucked into the world of something called doom scrolling, which is something new to me. I haven't heard of this term before, but I started to do my research and learned what doom scrolling actually was. And what doom scrolling is being sucked into reading or watching bad news story after bad news story over and over again, even though these stories are bringing a progression of more and more anxiety. But you're probably wondering, why, if something is giving us anxiety, why would we keep doing it? Why would that be something that on a mental and physiological level that we would be wanting to continue to do, right? Doesn't really make sense, because usually the body is geared to avoid pain and move towards pleasure, and doing something habitually that gives us more pain, meaning more anxiety, is kind of counterintuitive to that whole theory of thinking. The short answer of it all is control. With the whole Russia-Ukraine conflict and then COVID before that, and just pretty much the news has been crazy. Even prior to COVID, there's just been a lot of wildfires and things that have just gone on in the world that have been pretty heavy and perpetuated in the news cycle. With all that stuff, the more uncertainty it creates, the more we're going to want to seek control. And if we are glomming onto information through news articles or YouTube videos about the subject or about that, particular news wrap, it gives us kind of a false sense of control over things. When we have more information, sometimes we feel more in control, even if there's nothing we can physically do about it. It's just having more information about a situation eases kind of the aspects of feeling uncertain about it. So in the short term, we feel less anxious because we have more information, which gives us kind of the fallacy that we have more control. But in the long run, the more we continue to try to seek certainty through means of gaining more information, the more anxiety we're going to feel with each impact of each news article layered on top of the next. And over time, we feel even more anxious at the end of the day because we're trying to seek control over something that's completely uncertain and out of our hands. So speaking of anxiety, let's go ahead and talk about the number one indicator that you are probably consuming too much news, or news might not be in your best interest of mental and emotional well-being, and that is feeling anxious or depressed. So there's actually been multiple studies done linking poor mental health to a heightened amount of news exposure, especially during traumatic world events, or things even like one of the studies was actually on the Boston Marathon bombing in 2014, and they studied participants before and after the height of the news coverage on the Boston Marathon bombing, and they were able to correlate just a lot of more anxiety and depression in the participants that consumed more hours of news media coverage than other participants who consumed less. But we didn't really need fancy studies to show us that, because I'm sure you've noticed that in yourself if you're at that point where you've maybe watched a lot of coverage on the Russia-Ukraine conflict like I have, and you're starting to feel this like heightened, amped up anxiety. Ding, ding, ding. That should be an indicator that you're probably consuming too much news. And again, feeling anxiety while reading a news article or watching a YouTube clip of a conflict so tumultuous and scary like the Russia-Ukraine conflict right now, totally normal to feel anxiety during that. However, it's when the anxiety starts to stick with you like a residue throughout the entire day and kind of affect your day-to-day life and affect the lens in which you are living and seeing the world around you in, that it becomes more of an issue and something you can look at and be like, is it good for me to be consuming this right now? You get what I'm saying? But on the other hand, some people actually might not notice themselves feeling stressed or anxious. I tend to be one of those people that has a high tolerance for stress, and I won't necessarily sense it inside of my body sometimes, but I'll get other indicators that my body is stressed out or that I'm experiencing anxiety and really haven't tuned in to be aware of that. And that leads me into indicator number 2 of maybe you're consuming too much news, is if your sleep quality has been impacted. Oftentimes you might not notice your heightened anxiety throughout the day, but your brain is really smart and most likely is going to let you know that you've been anxious by way of not sleeping really great, having trouble falling asleep, having trouble staying asleep, or having nightmares. For my situation in particular, I knew this was the case when I went to bed and started having war dreams, because I had been watching way too many YouTube clips about the Ukraine conflict, and clearly my brain was stressed the heck out and started to process that stress through my dreams. And I do not recommend reliving more situations that you've seen on videos in your own dreams. It's scary. It's definitely scary. Now, obviously not as scary as the conflict going on, and I don't want to defer away from the intensity and the seriousness of the conflict that is existing right now in real world time. But I'm just saying, for your personal health and your personal body, just something to tune into if you're starting to experience things like that, like nightmares, or just waking up in the middle of the night, or having interrupted sleep, or just having a lot of difficulty falling asleep in the first place. And the third and final indicator that your news consumption has probably gone into that overboard, little too much category is that your productivity tanks, right? So if you are doom scrolling all day and constantly having part of your brain and attention into the news and what's going on in the world, and the anxiety is kind of getting triggered, right? It's really hard to focus on what you need to do for work, for your family, whatever your day-to-day responsibilities might be. Those might be taking a hit because of just part of your brain being occupied by, what you've just watched on the news or needing to go to another article. And again, this is something I'm totally guilty of this past week, and I've found that it's starting to border into unhealthy territory because, I get a 10-minute break, let me go to a news article. I could really take a break right now. So I started to actually create reasons to take breaks because I wanted to keep up to date on the latest of what's going on in the world with this conflict. So again, didn't really serve my work life well this past week, but I noticed it now, and that's why I wanted to share it with you guys. So those are 3 indicators that you can tune into to notice if maybe you're consuming a little bit too much news for your emotional and mental well-being. But it doesn't mean that you need to go ahead and duck your head in the sand and pretend like nothing's going on in the world and the news is real. There's definitely a fine balance of those things, right? So I want to provide you guys also with 3 ways to actually healthfully and safely and beneficially consume the news in a way that's not going to border into that doom scrolling / unhealthy territory. So tip number 1 for safe news and media consumption is to maybe switch to articles instead of watching YouTube videos or anything graphic or visual or even auditory. I found that it's been way easier for me to consume the news in a, CNN article or a New York Times article or something like that and reading instead of watching a YouTube clip or even listening to a podcast. And the reason being is that we pick up cues from language and voice tonality and colors and things like that indicate stress, right? Because if I'm talking to you like this and really shaky and nervous and bringing a lot of attention and seriousness to my voice, it already starts to transpose this sense of anxiety to you. So by reading an article, we're able to take some of that emotion that's transposed from the reporter or from the visuals on the screen and be able to just understand it from a little bit more, I don't want to say factual, but a little bit more like less emotionally intense perspective, if that makes sense. So I found that to be a really helpful tip, is just kind of switching over to reading more articles rather than the visuals, especially of news media coverage. There's a lot of vivid color and imagery and a lot of moving graphics on the screen and a lot of if you notice the yellows and the reds and the really big text and font, it's all pretty, in your face, and it's designed that way to keep you feeling on the edge of your seat, like you keep needing to watch it more. So it does feed into that. That's why articles can be a little bit better of a source. The second way to consume news safely and in a way that's going to respect your emotional and mental well-being is to set a time limit. Maybe that's 30 minutes, maybe that's 15 minutes, whatever that looks like and is appropriate for you, because again, we each have a different type of tolerance for this stuff, and our bodies, we have to trust our bodies to give us the indicator and kind of pay attention to those 3 indicators that I mentioned before. But your indicators could be different too, so take mine with a grain of salt. That's just what I've noticed in my personal situation. But I think setting a time limit on your news consumption can be really, really helpful just in sticking to that, just like your phone has an app limit, right? You can set app limits for being on Instagram for a certain amount of time. I think we should do the same with our news consumption and pretty much, stay pretty true to that the best we can. And lastly, my third tip for consuming media safely for your mental and emotional well-being is to take control if you can. If there is something on the news that really does bother you or give you a lot of anxiety because you don't feel like you have any control or any kind of certainty in the situation, see if there is something that you can do. In a lot of situations, there are. For example, in this Russia-Ukraine conflict, there are so many amazing foundations and people out there doing work for the Ukrainian people to help support them, that you can donate to the foundations. You can, go as far as, even going to fight in Ukraine, there's a lot of different things that you can do on different levels that you can feel comfortable with, but at least being able to feel like you have some control within the situation can be really helpful too. There are several great foundations and groups that are really doing amazing work to supporting the people in Ukraine right now as they're going through what they are with the Russian invasion. One of those foundations is called Voices of Children, and it's a charitable foundation based in Ukraine that is helping to serve the psychological needs of children that have been stuck in war-torn Ukraine since 2015 and are especially, being needed right now in this time that Ukraine's going through. And that's just one of many, many different foundations that are helping to support and raise money and resources and services for the people of Ukraine right now. And I'm actually going to go ahead and list a bunch of those foundations down below in the description. So if you feel like you have a heart to serve these people of Ukraine and really help them out in this time of conflict, you can choose something that speaks to you below and be able to have some sort of control in the situation in that way. Heck, there's even a celebrity chef, Jose Andres, who is based in DC, who actually flew over to the Eastern Bloc and has been providing refugees from Ukraine with food. He'll do this every so often when there's countries in conflict. He will go to those territories and actually cook for them and provide meals for them and make sure that they're well nourished. And that is so cool too. And I'll put his link down below as well if you want to help fund his journey, as he is providing a lot of those Ukraine refugees that are over in Poland right now and heading into other territories in the Eastern Bloc. He's helping them out and just making sure that they're getting food that they need. Well, guys, I hope this information was useful for you. I know it was certainly from my own learning experience, and I wanted to hand that down to you guys. And as always, if you could go ahead and like this video and subscribe to my channel, I'd greatly appreciate it. And definitely check out those links down below to help the people of Ukraine. Like I said, there's several amazing foundations out there that are doing some really cool work. And I think it's really great that, people can all come together in this time and really be able to help out the situation down there. All right, guys, until next time, bye.